Hello everybody, my name is Mario5514 and welcome back to another Splatoon Talk video. In this video we're going to be looking at some more what-if patch notes for Splatoon 3 for patch 10.2. You guys like the last two videos that I've done, so here's part 3 for you all. Keep in mind these are only what-ifs of what we would like to see instead of what Nintendo will give us, as the devs did confirm after 10.1 dropped that we would get another update. So without further ado, let's get started. But before we do, let's jump right into our third kits and what weapons from the Kenta collection should return for this update. First up is the Kenta 52, which I've decided to give it Auto Bomb and Triple Splashdown. You know, since Splattershot didn't get it, I think 52 gal is the next best thing, or it's a potential candidate to get it. Do I think this weapon should get it? Yes. Do I think it would happen? Unfortunately, no. But I do think 52 is a possible candidate for it. Not to mention it would make a Slayer like 52 more of an effective fighting weapon. Though, I mean, when you're looking at Slayers like 52, they tend to go down their own paths. So I think this one will go down a more interesting path than what we see with the regular 52. So I think this kit would work a lot for it in the long term. Alright, next up is the Kenta Rapid Blaster with Burst Bomb and Crab Tank. Now, a lot of people were kind of disappointed that the Rapid Blaster Pro didn't get Splash Wall, so they were hoping that Wall would be on the regular Rapid. Though I do think I want it to be more in a fighting position, so I gave it Burst Bomb, as well as give it Crab Tank. Even though it is a repeat of what we see on Splashmatic, I do think Rapid Blaster could work very well with this kit, given that Burst Bomb works very well with the weapon's directs, as well as a bit of its indirects. And it also helps maintain its position when you're using Crab Tank, given that Crab is one of the best specials right now. So I think if this kit were to happen, I think Rapid Blaster players would benefit a lot in the long term. Alright, next up are the Kenta Gluga Dualies with Fizzy Bomb and Inkjet. We currently have no dualies in Splatoon 3 that have Inkjet, and I really hope Gluga Dualies get Inkjet. And pairing it with Fizzy Bomb would be a lot better than some of the other subs we have. I mean, Splash Wall's not bad on the regular Glugas. Point Sensor is kind of just there. Like, I don't see it being as effective on Glugas. But I do think Fizzy Bomb would work very well for its poking power, and Inkjet could help it take it to the air, and even after you hit the floor, you could just dodge roll your way out of there and try to go after anyone who tries to get close to you. So I think this kit would work a lot in the long term. Alright, next up is the Kenta Luna Blaster. I decided to go with Burst Bomb and Inkstorm for it. Given that Burst Bombs work very well with Luna Blaster's close quarter combat with its blast radius, I also think Inkstorm could help it out when it's moving forward, given that if it's ever under attack from any long-range threats, it could just throw out Inkstorm and just continue going after their opponents. Because as of 6.1, Inkstorm heals anyone who's underneath it, basically you and your teammates, but it still does damage to your opponents if they're under it. So I think this kit would work a lot for Luna Blaster, put it in a very interesting position as having fighting power and having a supportive style on fighting. Alright, next up is the Kenta Splattershot Jr. I decided to go with Auto Bomb and Inkstorm, since, I mean, there's not that many good kits to put on Junior, since Junior is just there and it's just an entry-level weapon. So I think Auto Bomb and Inkstorm would be decent for it, even though it is a reference to what the custom Junior had in Splatoon 2. I do think this kit would work a lot for Junior, given that you're able to locate where your opponents are, like sniff them out, and then use Inkstorm as a supportive footstool for your team. Given that Junior will rarely fight and it will barely see any use as a support weapon. And that's it. I think this kit is fair enough for it, and that's it. And last up is the Kenta Sloshing Machine. I decided to go with Auto Bomb and Crab Tank. You know, looking back at Splatoon 2, Sloshing Machine was given Auto Bomb, but I do think we can keep Auto Bomb, and decided to give it Crab Tank on top. I mean, currently the current kits right now, regular machine is in a good spot, though it's just it has a very high points for special, and it's just not in a good position right now. It's only like a niche pick. Neo Sloshing Machine is in the same pit, though it has point sensor for some reason, which you have no painting sub, though you do have a cheap Zuka to compensate for it. So I think Auto Bomb and Crab Tank would put the machine in a better position, making it that it's able to maintain its hold, and being able to maintain its hold with Auto Bomb and sniff them out, as well as enable attacks, as well as use Crab Tank to maintain its hold and help its team move forward. So I think this kit could work for Sloshing Machine. Do I see it happening? Unfortunately, no. But I do think it's a possibility. Alright, on to our main weapon changes. First up is Splattershot. We're going to decrease its ink consumption by 3%. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while on the ground by approximately 18%, going from 4.86 degrees to 4 degrees. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by approximately 12%, from 11.66 degrees to 10 degrees. We're going to increase its droplet rate from 1.5 to 2, and then decrease the distance between droplets from 9.2 units to 8.5. Now for Splatter Shot, the changes that I've gave this weapon are to make it that it's more flexible with its team, make it adapt to its situations more effectively, and be more of a supportive weapon that anyone could have in any comp. So I think with Splatter Shot, I think the weapon would see a lot more use, and after that, I think the changes from here will be fine, and that's all that shot will get afterwards. All right, next up is the 52 gal. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its shot deviation while on the ground and while jumping by approximately 8%. So its shot deviation on the ground will go from 6 degrees to 5 degrees. When it's jumping, it'll go from 12 degrees to 11 degrees, just fine. We're going to increase its droplet rate from 2.4 to 2.5. We're going to decrease the max frequency in which bullets shoot towards the outer reticle from 25% to 20%. And then finally, decrease the distance between droplets from 5.5 units to 5.35 units. And the changes I made to 52 are to make him more flexible with the team and have it move forward more effectively with the paint buff. But at the same time, we're going to maintain its role as a Slayer weapon and maintain its status as a low accuracy weapon. So I think these changes will make 52 fight more, though at the same time, it does have to be careful with the ink consumption nerf it was recently given. Do I think these changes would happen? No. Do I see some of them happening, like not all of them? I could. There could be a possibility, though unfortunately I don't see it happening, given that 52 is the most hated weapon in the game. And I do like using this weapon, to be honest. Alright, next up are changes to the 96 gal. So for all three weapons, we're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by roughly 12%, going from 11.3511 degrees to 10 degrees. We're going to increase its droplet rate from 3.4 to 4. We're going to decrease the max frequency in which bullets shoot towards the outer reticle from 30% to 20%. We're going to increase its shot velocity by roughly 6%. We're going to decrease the distance between droplets from 6 units to 5.5 units. And then finally, increase its effective range by roughly 3%. So just a small buff. And for 96 gal, its initial velocity with this change will go from 2.377 units to 2.52 units per frame. And the velocity after 5 frames will go from 2.45 units to 2.6 units a frame. So yeah, I think 96 could see a lot more use. I think 96 Deco would see a lot more use, push it up higher. The Claws in 96 gal could see a little more use, given that it's a solid cooler weapon. Do I see these changes happening? Unfortunately, not all of them. However, I have heard hints that a lot of people want a shot velocity buff, so I think this one would push 96 a little higher up in the long term. And so I think after these changes, 96 will be fine from here. Alright, next up are changes to the Splatter Shot Pro. So for all three weapons, we're going to increase its droplet rate from 2 to 3. We're going to increase its shot velocity by approximately 4%. From its initial velocity will go from 2.2698 units to 2.375 units per frame. And then for the velocity after 3 frames, it'll go from 3.8333333 units to 4 units per frame. We're going to increase its effective range by approximately 13%, going from 15.06 units to 17 units. I mean, it'll still outrange 96, given that its range will go from 15.97 units to 16.45 units. So yeah, I do see Pro being more of a supportive option. Decrease its shot deviation while jumping by approximately 17%, and then decrease the distance between droplets from 8.8 units to 7.75 units. So the changes to Pro are to make it more flexible with its team, though at the same time maintain its position or maintain its role as a midline weapon. Do I think these changes will happen? Unfortunately, no, but I do see Pro being more of a supportive option as we move forward through the meta. Alright, next up are changes to the NZAP 85 and 89. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by approximately 17%. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while on the ground by approximately 16%. We're going to increase its droplet rate from 1.4 to 1.5. We're going to increase its shot velocity by approximately 7%. We're going to decrease the distance between droplets from 11 units to 10.5 units. And then finally, increase its effective range by roughly 3%. So after these changes, NZAP's initial velocity will go from 1.4495 units to 1.557 units per frame. Its velocity after 4 frames will go from 2.2 units to 2.35 units per frame. And its effective range will go from 11.14 units to 11.47 units. So it's going to be in line with Splattershot. Do I see all these changes happening? Not really. However, I do think Zap would be in a better position. It could fight more, though at the same time, it cannot spam its special as much. It can't spam Cooler. And so I think these changes are to make it more flexible, more supportive, though at the same time, give it the incentive to fight so it's not just going to spam its special. So I think these changes would be fine. Alright, next up are changes to the H3 nozzle nose. So for all 3 weapons, we're going to decrease its ink consumption by approximately 15%. We're going to increase its shot velocity by approximately 4%. So after these changes, H3's initial velocity will go from 2.2698 units to 2.37 units per frame. Its velocity after 4 frames will go from 2.875 units to 3 units per frame. We're going to increase its effective range by approximately 11% from 15.06 units to 16.65 units. So H3 has the incentive to fight a little more, and it doesn't have and it won't get outranged by a lot of the other weapons, even though Pro will outrange it, though slightly. We're going to increase its droplet rate from 3 to 4, and then decrease the distance between droplets from 6 units to 5.5 units. The changes here are to make H3 more flexible, more supportive, though at the same time maintain its role as a midline weapon. So I think these changes would help H3 substantially. We could see H3D show its face more, given that it has a very supportive kit to work off of, which I think is nice. Alright, next up are changes to Squeezer. So for both weapons, we're going to increase its droplet rate while holding ZR from 1.5 to 2. We're going to increase its shot velocity while holding ZR by approximately 14%, which means its initial velocity will go from 2.3032 units to 2.65 units per frame. We're going to increase the velocity after 3 frames will go from 2.4 units to 2.75 units per frame. We're going to increase its damage while pressing ZR from 38 to 40. We're going to decrease the distance between droplets while holding ZR from 8.67 units to 7.75 units. And then finally, increase its effective range while holding ZR by roughly 3%. So it'll go from 10.81 units to 11.15 units, and that's only for when you're holding ZR. The changes here are to make Squeezer more of a viable pick, but at the same time, maintain its role as a midline weapon and maintain its status as a high skill weapon. So yeah, we're going to keep the weapon's high skill ceiling, though at the same time try to make it more effective or more viable to run in certain comps. So I think these changes would definitely help Squeezer a lot. Alright, next up are changes to the L3 nozzle nose. So for all 3 weapons, we're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by 50%. We're going to decrease the distance between droplets from 12 units to 11.8 units, and then decrease the max frequency in which bullets shoot towards the outer reticle from 25% to 20%. I mean, the changes here are to make L3 more of a supportive option, as well as make it more flexible, though at the same time maintain its role as a frontline weapon. Do I see these changes happening? Not really. And a lot of people said it's more of a kit problem that L3 struggles with, though I think making the main weapon a little more effective, I think would push it a little higher, though it's only going to be like a niche pick in certain situations. Alright, next up are changes to the Jet Squelcher. So for all 3 weapons, we're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by approximately 25%. We're going to decrease the distance between droplets from 10 units to 9.5 units. We're going to increase the number of frames bullets fly straight through the air from 5 frames to 6. We're going to decrease the chance for bullets to deviate towards the outer reticle from 1.5% to 1% per shot, and then increase its droplet rate from 2.4 to 2.5. The changes here are to make Jet Squelcher more supportive, as well as make it more flexible, though at the same time maintain its role as a backline weapon. So I think Jet Squelcher would feel a lot better with these changes, though I doubt people are going to be using it. But I do see the custom Jet Squelcher, or even the Jet Squelcher Cobra being used here. So that's nice. After that, Jet Squelcher will be fine. Alright, next up are changes to the Carbon Roller. So for all 3 weapons, we're going to decrease its ink consumption from 3.96% to 3.5%. We're going to increase its damage when performing a horizontal flick from dealing between 50 and 100 damage to 75 and 125 damage. We're going to increase its damage when performing a horizontal flick at minimum range from 25 to 50, so its fall-off damage will be higher. And then increase the damage when performing a vertical flick from 120 to 125. I think these changes I think the changes to Carbon Roller are to make it more of a powerful sharking weapon, and at the same time make it that players have to be more careful when they're dealing with Carbon Roller on the opposing team. Alright, next up are changes to Flings a Roller. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its cooldown before refilling its ink tank after performing a vertical flick by 1/6 of a second, or by 10 frames, so we'll have 10 frames less white ink. We're going to decrease its ink consumption when performing a vertical flick by approximately 10%, so it have one more flick before having to refill its ink tank, and then increase its minimum damage when performing a vertical flick from 20 to 40. So regardless of where you are when you hit your opponent with the vertical flick, the minimum damage will be locked at 40, regardless of how far away you are from them. So yeah, I think Flings a Roller would be more of a supportive option, and at the same time make it that it's able to have more uptime, less gear dependency, and make it that it's more flexible with the team. Alright, next up are changes to Dynamo Roller. So for all three weapons, we're going to increase the angle in which the horizontal flick deals maximum damage from 14.5 degrees to 16 degrees, so it's in line with Carbon Roller and Splat Roller. We're going to decrease the amount of time it takes to pick up the weapon by performing a horizontal flick by 1/12 of a second, or by 5 frames, and then decrease its ink consumption by approximately 10%, from 18% to 17%. Changes here are to make Dynamo Roller more of a flexible weapon, as well as push it outside of being a niche weapon on certain maps. So it's basically going to increase the frequency of its appearance on outside of certain maps, so like being a situational niche. Do I see all these changes happening? Of course. I just don't know about the horizontal flick buff, the amount of time it takes to perform the flick. But I think the other two, I could see those happening. Alright, next up are changes to the Squiffers, for both Classic and New Squiffer. So for both weapons, we're going to increase its minimum range by approximately 4%. Its minimum range will get buffed by approximately 2%. Not much there. And then we're going to increase its movement speed when charging while moving from 0.03 units to 0.05 units. The changes here are to make Squiffer more of a viable pick, though at the same time maintain its role as a midline weapon. So these changes are to make it more of a threatening weapon, as well as give it something else to work with besides its charge hold mechanic. Alright, next up are changes to the Goo Tubers. So for both weapons, we're going to increase its maximum range by roughly 2%, just small. We're going to increase its movement speed when charging while moving, like we did with Squiffer, from 0.03 units to 0.05 units. We're going to increase its minimum range by approximately 3%, so it will be slightly higher. And then increase its minimum damage from 40 to 45, so its tap shots will be more effective. I think these changes are to make Goo Tuber more of a viable pick, though at the same time maintain its position as a midline weapon, and that's it. Alright, next up are changes to Snipe Rider, or as people just call it, Pencil. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its shot distance at full charge by roughly 10%. We're going to decrease its damage at full charge from 68 to 65. We're going to increase its cooldown after firing before refilling its ink tank by 1/6 of a second, so we'll have 10 frames more white ink. But we're also going to increase its damage to Crab Tank by 15%. I think object damage is something that Pencil struggles with the most compared to other chargers, so I think Pencil being more of a weapon that could fight other players, but at the same time be more toned back enough to where people can counter it so it's not as annoying to deal with. And that's all that Pencil will ever get. Alright, next up are changes to Blaster. So for all three weapons, we're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by roughly 20%, from 10 degrees to 8 degrees. We're going to increase its movement speed by approximately 22%. We're going to decrease its ink consumption by approximately 10%, from going from 10% down to 9%, so I'll have 2 more shots before having to refill its ink tank, and then decrease the max frequency in which blasts deviate towards the outer reticle while jumping from 50% to 40%. So Blaster is going to be less gear dependent, have more uptime, and could see a little more use in certain comps, especially regular Blaster, given that it's a popular weapon to run in dive comps. So I could see Blaster making appearances more and more. Alright, next up are changes to Range Blaster. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by approximately 25%, going from 8 degrees to 6 degrees. We're going to decrease its ink consumption by approximately 10%, going from 11% back to 10%, so it has 2 more shots before having to refill. We're going to decrease its cooldown after firing before refilling its ink tank by 1/6 of a second, so I have 10 frames less white ink. We're going to increase its damaging explosion area, or its blast radius, by 3% from 3.3 units to 3.4 units. And then finally, decrease the max frequency in which blasts deviate towards the outer reticle while jumping from 50% to 40%. The changes here are to make Range Blaster more of a viable option to run, as well as have less downtime, more uptime, less gear dependency, and is able to pick a fight more effectively. And a lot of people have said with its blast radius currently, as well as previously, prior to 9.0, It originally was at 3.5 units before it went down to 3.3. So I think 3.4 units is like the equilibrium for Range Blaster. So it's not going to be as annoying to deal with when it's at 3.5, and it's not going to be as weak to the player using it when it's at 3.3. So I think 3.4 is the equilibrium where Range Blaster can fight, so it doesn't feel as weak to the user, and at the same time, it's not going to be as annoying to deal with. So I think that's it. After that, Range Blaster will be fine from here. Alright, next up are changes to Luna Blaster. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by roughly 33%. We're going to decrease its ink consumption from 7.5% to 6%. We're going to decrease the max frequency in which blasts deviate towards the outer reticle while jumping from 50% to 40%. And then increase its movement speed by approximately 22%. So the changes to Luna Blaster are to increase its viability, increase its uptime, decrease its gear dependency, and make it more of a viable pick to run in certain comps. Alright, next up are changes to Rapid Blaster. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by approximately 25%. We're going to increase its movement speed by roughly 9%. And then decrease the max frequency in which blasts deviate towards the outer reticle while jumping from 50% to 40%. And changes here to make Blaster more of a viable pick, and at the same time, increase its uptime and decrease its gear dependency. Alright, up next is Rapid Blaster Pro. So for all three weapons, we're going to give it the same changes like we did to Rapid Blaster. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by approximately 25%, increase its movement speed by roughly 9%, and then decrease the max frequency in which blasts deviate towards the outer reticle while jumping from 50 to 40%. So yeah, Rapid Pro would be in a better position. It'll have more uptime, less gear dependency, and is able to be more of a reliable anchor weapon. And next up we have is Clash Blaster. A lot of you wanted these changes. I didn't want to buff Clash, but some of you did suggest or recommend. Some of you guys did want these changes, so here you go. So first up, we're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by approximately 25%. We're going to decrease the max frequency in which blasts deviate towards the outer reticle while jumping from 50 to 40%, and then increase its movement speed by about 6%. The changes here are just to make Clash Blaster more bearable, though at the same time the main weapon just sucks, and it's rarely going to see the light of day ever. Though these changes could make it useful, could make it more effective, though at the same time it just still sucks to use. At least you have Luna Blaster as a standby. Alright, next up are changes to Mini Splatling. So for all three weapons, we're going to increase its droplet rate from 1.6 to 1.7. We're going to increase its movement speed while charging by approximately 6%. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while on the ground by approximately 37%. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by approximately 25%, and then decrease the distance between droplets from 10 units to 9.5 units. The changes here are to make Mini Splatling more of a supportive option, make it more flexible, and decrease its gear dependency and increase its uptime, though at the same time maintain its role as a frontline weapon. So yeah, I think Mini could see a lot more use afterwards. Alright, next up are changes to Heavy Splatling. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by approximately 14%. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while on the ground by approximately 9%. We're going to increase the radius of standard ink droplets from 1.26 units to 1.31 units. And then decrease its cooldown before refilling its ink tank by 1/12 of a second, or by 5 frames. So I have 5 frames less white ink. Even though a lot of people have said Heavy Splatling has a kit problem compared to the main weapon, though I think making the main weapon more useful could definitely make it more of a viable pick in the long term than just being like a niche weapon. Alright, next up are changes to Ballpoint Splatling. So for both weapons, we're going to increase the effective run speed up from 25 to 30%. We're going to increase its short range damage from 28 to 30. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by roughly 25%, which that will only work with its long range mode. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while on the ground by approximately 33%. Again, another buff going towards its long range mode. We're going to increase its shot velocity in long range mode by roughly 8%. And then finally, increase the radius of shots by roughly 3%. So it'll paint 3% more. So the changes here to make Ballpoint more of a viable pick, increase its uptime, decrease its gear dependency, and make it more of a viable pick to run in comps. Because I do think if Inkjet doesn't get buffed, I think buffing Ballpoint itself, the main weapon, I think could be more of an effective way in case like Inkjet is still terrible, Ballpoint could still fight very effectively. So I think these changes are there in case like Inkjet doesn't get buffed. Alright, next up are changes to the Nautilus. So for both weapons, we're going to increase its movement speed while charging by approximately 50%. We're going to increase its movement speed while firing by approximately 25%. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while on the ground by approximately 9%, and then decrease its shot deviation while jumping by approximately 8%. I think the changes here are to make Nautilus more effective in fighting, decrease its gear dependency, and give it another strategy to use, or give it open other doors for Nautilus to go through, as it should be able to move fast as well as have the charge time mechanic, like the charge hold mechanic. I think this would make Nautilus more of an effective fighting weapon. Alright, next up are changes to the heavy edit splatling. So for both weapons, we're going to increase its damage from 26 to 28. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by approximately 17%. We're going to decrease the max frequency in which bullets shoot towards the outer reticle from 30% to 25%. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while on the ground by approximately 17%, and then increase its movement speed while charging by approximately 6%, same buff we gave Mini. So the changes here are to make heavy edit splatling more of a viable pick, increase its uptime, and decrease its gear dependency, and have higher DPS against other weapons or any other object, as Edit has high object damage, so having its damage even higher makes Edit a much better weapon, or more effective to fight against Crab Tank. So I think these changes are going to make Edit more an effective anchor weapon. Alright, next up are changes to Sloshing Machine. So for both weapons, we're going to increase its movement speed by approximately 25%. We're going to decrease its ink consumption by about 10%. We're going to decrease the interval between continuous swings by 3/60ths of a second, or by 3 frames. We're going to increase the radius of ink coverage when the center of a shot hits the ground by about 9%, and then decrease the cooldown before refilling its ink tank by 1/12 of a second, or by 5 frames. Changes here are to make Sloshing Machine more of a viable pick, increase its uptime, decrease its gear dependency, and make it a more viable pick, or more bearable to run in certain comps. So I think that these changes would make Machine more usable, though at the same time we do not want to bring back Crab meta, but we're also wanting to maintain its status or role as a midline weapon. Alright, next up are changes to the Tri-Slosher. So for all 3 weapons, we're going to increase its movement speed by about 6%. We're going to increase its sloshing range while jumping by approximately 3%. We're going to decrease its cooldown before refilling its ink tank by 3/60ths of a second. But we're also going to increase its interval between continuous swings by 2/60ths of a second. I think the changes here for Tri-Slosher are to make it more of a viable pick to run, given that Tri-Slosher Nouveau is still in a horrible spot right now, given with its points for special being very high. I do think the sloshing range when jumping is a nice one there, though the trade-off for that is to increase its interval between continuous swings. So it's going to be 2 frames slower. The interval will be 2 frames slower as a trade-off for having longer range while jumping. After that, Tri-Slosher will be good from there. Alright, next up are changes to the X-Blosher. So for both weapons, we're going to increase its explosion radius that deals 35 damage by approximately 7%, going from 2.8 units to 3 units. We're going to decrease its ink consumption by approximately 8%, so it's still going to be ink hungry, though at the same time, it's not going to be as ink hungry, and it's also going to have less gear dependency on Ink Saver main. And then finally, we're going to decrease its cooldown before refilling your ink tank by 1/6 of a second, or by 10 frames. I think the changes here are to make X-Blosher more of a viable pick, increase its uptime, decrease its gear dependency, but maintain its role as a backline weapon. So I think these changes to X-Blo are very solid enough. I think that the regular model has seen a lot of use in Splat Zone, so it's going to make more appearances after these changes. So yeah, I think having less gear dependency and more uptime for X-Blosher, definitely a big step forward here. Alright, next up are changes to the Splat Dualies. So for all 3 weapons, we're going to increase its ink consumption by about 11%. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by approximately 7%, and then decrease its cooldown before refilling your ink tank after rolling by 1/6 of a second, or by 10 frames. So the dodge roll will have 10 frames less white ink after you dodge roll, so when you refill your ink tank. Changes here are just to maintain Dooley's position, but at the same time make sure it's it's toned back enough to where it could see use, though at the same time it doesn't get too powerful. Alright, next up are changes to the Dooley Squelchers. So for all 3 weapons, we're going to increase its damage from 28 to 30. We're going to decrease its ink consumption when rolling by 25%. We're going to increase its shot velocity by approximately 15%. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while on the ground by approximately 25%. When jumping, it'll go down by approximately 12%, but we're also going to increase its effective range by approximately 9%. So with these changes, for dually squelchers, its initial velocity will go from 2.2698 units to 2.63 units per frame. Its velocity after 5 frames will go from 2.3 units to 2.65 units per frame, and its effective range will go from 15.06 units to 16.4 units. So dually squelchers will have a better chance of fighting, increase its viability so it could be run in certain comps, increase its uptime, decrease its gear dependency, as well as have more ink to use in turret mode, which I think is nice. As well as the damage buff could really help the Ember's dually squelchers, that given that currently the 2 shots deal 56, screen does 40, and you're left in 96. But if the shots deal 30, 2 shots deal 60, screen does 40, and it makes dually squelchers a 2 shot rather than a 3 shot. So I think dually squelchers would be more effective in a line of skirmish than before after these changes. Alright, next up are changes to the tetra dualies. So for both weapons, we're going to increase its damage from 28 to 30. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while on the ground by approximately 32%. We're going to increase its shot velocity by roughly 11% without changing the flight distance, so without affecting its range. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while jumping by approximately 14%, and we're going to decrease the chance for bullets to deviate towards the outer reticle from 4% to 2.5%. So the changes after dark tetra dualies, or for the tetra dualies, their velocity will go from 2.21 units to 2.45 units per frame. But the velocity for the bullets after traveling straight will go from 2.205 units to 2.095 units per frame. So I mean, it's a bit of a trade-off there for tetras there. But at the same time, I think tetra dualies could be a lot better with these changes. Not to mention, instead of dealing 28 and now dealing 30 damage, tetra dualies can now combo with Reef Slider, as Reef Slider's blast radius does 70 and Tetra's deals 30. It makes Tetra as a 1-shot instead of a 2-shot. So I think dark tetra dualies will see the most use after these changes. I doubt these are going to happen, but if they do, tetras are going to be a lot more effective to run in certain comps, along with dually squelchers. Alright, next up are changes to the Gluga dualies. So for both weapons, we're going to increase its shot velocity by approximately 5% without changing the flight distance. We're going to decrease its shot deviation while on the ground by approximately 6%, and then decrease its ink consumption when rolling by approximately 25%. So the changes here are to make Gluga dualies more viable to run in certain comps. But of course, the range or the velocity for the shots for Gluga dualies after the changes will go from 2.85 units to 3 units per frame. And the velocity after traveling straight will go from 2.8115 units to 2.655 units per frame. So yeah, I think Gluga dualies would be a lot better to run afterwards. And at the same time, it could see a few more uses in some more uses in area cups or even in the Syndicate tournaments. Alright, next up are changes to the Dowser dualies. So for both weapons, we're going to decrease its ink consumption when rolling by approximately 20%. We're going to decrease its cooldown after rolling by 1/6 of a second or by 10 frames, so I have 10 frames less white ink after dodge rolling. We're going to decrease its shot deviation after rolling by approximately 13%, so its turret mode will be more accurate. But we're also going to increase the pain radius of shots at the point of impact by 8%. So it's similar to the buff that Splattershot Pro is given in 4.1. So the changes here are to make Dowser dualies more supportive and make them more flexible, though at the same time make them a little hard to use and maintain the role as skirmish weapons or as midline weapons. Though I do think having more ink to use in turret mode as well as making them more accurate makes Dowsers more of a threat to use or to be in certain comps. I think to increase its viability there would be a huge score for Dowsers, especially with the paint buff that we gave it. Alright, next up are changes to the Splatbrella and Sorelabrella. So for both weapons, we're going to increase its maximum damage from 81 to 85, meaning that its pellet damage will go from 16.2 to 17. We're going to increase its minimum damage by each droplet from 10.8 to 11. Very small, but it'll be fine. We're going to increase its movement speed while shielding from 0.055 units to 0.06 units. But we're also going to decrease the damage dealt to the canopy from charger-type weapons by about 25%. So Splatbrella and Sorelabrella will now have 25% more resistance or durability. The canopies will have 25% more durability against chargers like Squiffer, regular charger, or even E-liter. So I think Brellas would be a lot more effective with them. The changes here are to make it more flexible and make them more powerful to make them more threatening, though at the same time maintain their role as support weapons. Alright, next up are changes to the tent umbrella. So for all three weapons, we're going to increase the number of pellets fired from 13 to 15. We're going to decrease the amount of time it takes to regenerate its canopy from 5.67 seconds to 5.5 seconds. Small change there. We're going to decrease its cooldown before refilling its ink tank by 1/6 of a second, or by 10 frames. We're going to decrease its ink consumption by approximately 5%, so it'll have one more shot before having to refill. And then increase its minimum damage from 17 to 18, so Tent Umbrella is now going to be more threatening. Changes here to make it more of a viable pick, though at the same time maintain its difficulty and maintain its role as a midline weapon. Do I think these changes would happen? I don't think so, but I do think it would make Tent more of a threat to run in certain comps. Alright, next up are changes to the Undercover Umbrella. So for all three weapons, we're going to increase its damage from 40 to 45. We're going to decrease the amount of time it takes to regenerate its canopy from 3.7 seconds to 3.5 seconds. We're going to increase the number of pellets fired from 7 to 9, and then increase its canopy damage on contact from 20 to 30. So we're trying to make Undercover Umbrella more bearable as well as more viable, though at the same time maintain its role as like a support weapon, you could say. So yeah, Undercover would feel a lot better with these changes, could see a lot more use, though at the same time the main weapon still feels terrible to use. Alright, finally we have the Splatana Stamper. So for all three weapons, we're going to decrease its ink consumption by approximately 10%, and then increase the width of spray droplets created by charge slashes by approximately 5%. So we're basically trying to increase its viability, increase its uptime, and decrease its gear dependency, though at the same time maintain its status as a high difficulty weapon. So I'm trying to make it more viable, though I'm wanting to maintain its status as a high difficulty weapon, or a weapon with a high difficulty. So yeah, after that, Stamper will be good, and it won't need any more changes afterwards. It'll be fine. Alright, on to our sub-weapon changes. First up is Squid Beacon. We're going to decrease its ink consumption from 75 to 70%. We're also going to adjust the sub to where you can now super jump to it 3 times if you do not have them equipped. If your ally doesn't have them equipped, they can super jump to them as well as they can jump to yours. So Squid Beacons are going to be more supportive to run in certain comps, especially for certain weapons that have them, like the Mini Splatling Rattler or the Custom E-Leader, which has them. For Burst Bomb, we're just going to decrease its ink consumption from 45 to 40%. I do think if some of the Burst Bomb weapons would get their ink consumption nerfed, mainly Splash, I do think Burst Bomb can go back to 40%. Alright, next up are changes to Sprinkler. We're going to decrease its ink consumption from 60% to 50%. We're going to increase its high power duration by 4 seconds. We're going to increase its damage from 20 to 25, and then increase its HP from 120 to 140, making it that it's more supportive, it could take more damage, and it still acts like a little mini meat shield, so it could be more effective at shielding and protecting you from enemy attacks. Alright, next up are changes to Ink Mine. So we're going to increase its splash damage from 45 to 50. We're going to decrease its ink consumption from 60 to 50%, and then increase its tracking time after exploding by 3 seconds, so it will last 8 seconds instead of 5 seconds, and then Ink Mine will be good from there. Alright, next up are changes to Splash Wall. So we're going to increase its base duration by 1/3 of a second, going from 6.67 seconds to 7 seconds. We're going to increase its damage from 30 to 35. We're going to decrease the damage dealt to the sub by 10% from weapons that are Snipe Rider, E-Leader, and Hydra Splatling. So if you use those 3 weapons, you will now deal 10% less damage to Splash Wall. So I think for weapons with Splash Wall like Squeezer, it could see a little more use. For 52 Gal, it's just going to make it more annoying to deal with, though at the same time, 52 is going to have not much of a... It's not going to be as much of a big deal for Squeezer, but I think for 52, it's a substantial change. Though I do think if we buff Splash Wall's ink consumption, we basically negate 52 Gal's ink consumption nerf. So that's the last thing we want to do. And last up is Auto Bomb. We're going to increase its splash damage from 30 to 40. We're going to decrease its base duration by half a second, and then increase its enemy detection radius by approximately 8%. I think Auto Bomb could be used a little more after these changes, make it more threatening, though at the same time, you're gonna have to be a little more careful where you throw it, because it's not gonna last as long. Though I do see it as like a sub that will not travel as long, and it will eventually blow up. So it's kind of a nerf, though I do see it as, some people would see it as a buff. So these changes for Auto Bomb are fine. We'll keep them if they were to happen. Alright, on to the specials. First up is Trizuka. We're going to increase its blast radius that deals 53 damage from 2.5 units back to 4 units. so it's going to be consistent once again. We're going to increase its blast radius damage from 53 to 55, or increase the damage dealt by explosions. We're going to increase its base duration by 1 second. We're going to increase its damage dealt to Big Bubbler by 35%. We're going to increase its startup time by 1/12 of a second. We're also going to rework the special to where we're going to adjust the hit detection for the special to where hitting targets is more consistent than before. So what that means is if you're within Trizooka's blast radius, you will die. Or it's adjusting it to where if you're in between the gaps in between the bullets when they spiral, instead of it dealing no damage, that will now kill. So Trizooka's consistency will go higher up here. The argument I also have to say here is that if you increase its duration, but you also increase its startup, you give people more time to counter the special as well as have time to either get away or fight back. But I also think if you increase its duration time, you give people the chance to try to aim their shots more carefully, so they're just not panicking them so they're not going to panic them and just hit you unintentionally, which I do think is the problem. If you decrease its base duration, but if you increase its startup, you're basically incentivizing people to panic the shots without having them to think. So I think these changes would make Trizooka more effective, as well as make it that people have more time to aim their shots more carefully so they don't hit you unintentionally. Alright, next up are changes to Inkjet. So we're going to increase its strafe speed by 10%, increase its base duration by half a second. We're going to increase its 50 damage explosion radius by approximately 8%, going from 2.55 units to 2.75 units. We're going to increase its damage dealt to Big Bubbler by direct shots and explosions by 35%. Basically the same buff that we gave Trizooka, we're giving to Inkjet. We're going to increase its exhaust damage by 40%, so its kill time will be 1 second faster, and then increase its direct hit damage from 120 to 150. I do think these changes would make Inkjet more viable, and then it could increase its appearance more and more, as well as we could see ballpoint once again after a long time, since 4.0 and 4.1, when ballpoint was used before it started dropping off. Alright, next up are changes to Triple Ink Strike, or as people call it, Tri-Strike. We're going to increase its base duration by half a second. We're going to adjust the special to where you now have the ability to submerge in your ink when the special is in use. We're going to decrease its damage radius by about 3%, from 7.7 units to 7.5 units, and then decrease its damage every 5 frames from 37.5 to 35. So the changes there are to make Triple Ink Strike more effective, as well as have something to work with. I think the base duration can give people time to aim where to throw the markers, so they can throw them in more strategic positions. We're going to give it the ability to submerge in your ink, so you're able to move around, so you're not out in the open. We're going to decrease its damage radius, so people have a better chance to try to dodge the explosions when the missiles hit the floor. But we're also going to decrease its damage so that people could have a better chance to survive a little better, though at the same time Tri-Strike will be very powerful to deal with. Alright, next up are changes to Tacticooler. I'm going to increase the drinks effect from 17 to 18 seconds. When you have special power-up equipped, the maximum effect will go from 25 to 26 seconds. We're going to decrease its cooldown by half a second. We're also going to rework it to, after 3 seconds, the stand will disappear after all drinks are taken to reduce visual clutter. So basically what that means is, when you put down the stand, the drinks will be dispensed. After all your teammates have taken a drink from the cooler, the stand will disappear after 3 seconds to reduce visual clutter, though the cooldown will still be in effect regardless if the stand is present or not. So even if the stand disappears, the cooldown will still be in effect. So I think Tacticooler would be a lot more effective with it. Not to mention it's not going to be as damaging, as I do want people to focus on fighting than on the cooler. Alright, next up are changes to Super Chump. So for this special, we're going to increase the number of chumps launched from 12 to 14, increase its HP per chump from 60 to 80. We're going to decrease its base duration by 1 second. We're going to decrease the amount of time between the chumps falling and exploding by half a second, so they'll take 3 seconds to explode after they land. And then increase the blast radius that deals 70 damage by approximately 11%, going from 3.6 units to 4 units. So Super Chump is going to be a better entry tool, or better special to distract as well as deal damage for anyone who's too close to them. So yeah, I think Chump will be more threatening, as well as could see more use in Turf War and Splat Zones. Could possibly see some more use in like Rainmaker as well. Alright, next up are changes to the Kraken Royale. We're going to decrease its startup by 1/12 of a second, or by 5 frames, so its startup will be 5 frames faster. We're going to increase its 60 damage radius by roughly 8% from 2.65 units to 2.85 units, so its jump attack is going to be more threatening. We're going to decrease the amount of time to finish up charging up a charge attack by 3/60ths of a second, or by 3 frames. We're going to decrease the knockback while on tower and tower control by 5%, so you'll have 5% less knockback on the tower. And we're also going to adjust the special to where you now have the ability to super jump to any of your allies. So yeah, you now have the ability to super jump like you could with the original Kraken in Splatoon 1. Anything to make Kraken Royale powerful, though at the same time keep it in control where it's not going to be as annoying to deal with. Alright, next up are changes to Ultra Stamp. So for this special, we're going to increase its base duration by half a second, slightly reverting the nerf it got in 4.0. We're going to adjust the sound effect when activating to where it's now more audible for opponents to hear. So basically the same rework that Trizuka was given in 2.0, which is basically a nerf. We're also going to increase its damage to Big Bubbler after throwing the special by 10%. So if you throw the hammer and it lands on the barrier or on the top section of the device, it will deal 10% regardless of where you throw it. Alright, next up are changes to Triple Splashdown. So we're going to increase the radius inked by the explosion after super jumping by approximately 35%. So its paint radius will be 35% bigger. We're going to increase the HP for both fists from 100 to 150, so it'd be harder for people to destroy them. We're also going to increase its damage radius after super jumping by approximately 20%. So the damage radius will be 20% bigger, though its painting radius will be bigger than the damage radius. Though I think Triple Splashdown could see a lot more use afterwards, given that people do want to try to super jump with the special, though at the same time they do want to deploy the special after super jumping when they hit the floor. Though I think these changes could push it up to where it could now super jump and then deploy the special more effectively than before. And then last up on our special changes is Inkstorm. We're going to increase the frequency in which the special inks the ground from 192 drops to 215 drops. We're going to increase the drop paint radius from 1.9125 units to 2.01 units, so it's a paint buff. And then we're going to increase its damage to Crab Tank by 8%, and to Big Bubbler, its damage will be increased by 5%. So Inkstorm is going to have better area denial, better painting, and is able to keep up with a lot of the weapons that want to move forward, especially with its healing effect that it was given in 6.1. So Inkstorm could see more relevance, or could make more appearances in the future afterwards. Alright, on to our points for special changes. 96 Gal Deco will go from 210 to 200 points for special, getting Kraken a little faster. Forge Splattershot Pro will go down to 190p. After everyone's been begging for it to happen, I'm going to make it happen. H3D will get 190p. Squeezer will get 210, given with Zuka being toned back, though I do think 210 is powerful enough for Squeezer to see use, though at the same time it's not going to be as annoying to deal with, or it's not going to spam it as much. Flings a Roller will get 200p missiles, but Foil Flings will get 210 screen. So that's kind of funny, so the numbers are getting swapped around for both Flings a Rollers. Alright, Classic Squiffer will get 180p Bubble. New Squiffer will get Zipcaster at 190p. GooTuber will get Missiles at 190p. Range Blaster and CRB will go down to 200. Finally putting him in a position where he could see more use. Rapid Blaster Deco will get 200p, increasing its inkjet output. Rapid Pro Deco will go to 180p. Rapid Pro Winter will go to 190p, finally increasing its cooler output as well as making it more of a viable weapon to compete with Pencil. Ballpoint will go to 200p, increasing its inkjet output. Sloshing Machine will get 210, so Machine and Squeezer will escape 220p. Tri-Nouveau will go down to 200p, increasing its cooler output. Tri-Slosher Ashen will get 190p, lowering its screen output, so it's not going to be a spammer. Light Tetradualies will get 180p Zipcaster. Custom Dowsers will get Tri-Strike at 190p. Undercover Sorella will get Splatter Color Screen at 170. Sticker Stamper will get 200p, decreasing its Booyah Bomb output. And Dabble Doolies will be our next 160 weapon. So yeah, Dabble Doolies will join Carbon Roller to be at 160 points for special. And for the stages that I'd like to return for Splatoon 3, first up is Salt Spray Rig. I do think that this stage could return, even though it will undergo some very heavy reworks, especially for Clan Blitz being the new face in the crowd for it. Though I do think it's not going to undergo as many changes for Turf War as it will for like the Anarchy battles. We're going to bring back the Reef. I do think a lot of people like this stage a lot, so I think bringing it back from Splatoon 2 would be nice. as well as it was a very popular stage in Splatoon 2. So yeah, give people something fun, to have. And then finally, we're going to bring back Piranha Pit. I do think for the reworks, I think Turf War is not going to undergo anything. I think the stage won't undergo any changes for Turf War. For Tower Control, it'll undergo a few changes, but not as many. Clan Blitz, I could see it happening. Splat Zones, I haven't heard any complaints about Splat Zones when you're looking at it in Splatoon 2 or Splatoon 1. So yeah, I think it will undergo not that many changes, or it will undergo no changes at all. For Rainmaker, though, I do see a lot of reworks happening for this stage. And then after that, it'll be fine. It'll be good from there. And that's it. That is all of the changes for what I would like to see for 10.2. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.